Hi, I'm Dave Price, and I'd like to welcome back onto the show Des Taylor from Landlord Defence. Des, how are you doing, sir?
Doing absolutely fantastic. How are you?
Very well indeed, actually. And it must be great to have you back on the show because this is a real subject that's really close to my heart. But before we start, I was going to ask, where actually are you in the world today?
Well, today I'm in a HMO near the south coast or on the south coast. That's We've just done an inspection with the local housing authority for the owner of the property and the landlord. The first time they came round, they were a little bit funny, so they've come around again a second time. I've come down here to handle the inspection, to chaperone them around, answer their questions, and to show them how the property is compliant and to address any of their concerns throughout. And it's been a very interesting morning. A 6-bed HMO, licensed previously for 11. It's got planning permission for 11 occupants in 6 households, so 6 rooms with 11 people. There's only one single room in the whole property, and the quality that I've seen in this property is outstanding. And the owner and the landlord, the reason he asked us to come along was to be able to handle the situation with the council about things that we've seen in other councils that maybe have had contention. So some of those things are rooms where you have ensuite bed bathrooms and
Hmm.
you have tea stations or cooking facilities or a hybrid of the two or a mixture of those things. And so they wanted us to be there to be able to answer the questions with regard to housing health and safety rating system, with regard to fire regulations, to be able to explain to them about the fire alarm systems, how they've been put together, how the electrics are put together as well, and explain everything to them without the landlord having to fight and justify himself, that they were dealing with somebody who was equally as professionally trained as they are and is used to dealing with these situations. So it was a very, very, very great situation. And I'm going to say that it is a very long time since somebody has come to a property, said everything's absolutely wonderful, really, really good. There was only one little thing that happened. A little handle screw came off as I pushed the door in too far and tried to pull it. Of course, it was never designed for that, but it's not my property. Had a little bit of explaining to do to the landlord there. But that was the only thing. And you really do know when you ask the question of an environmental health officer with 20 years experience, um, would you allow your children to live in this property? And if the answer to that is yes, you know you've done a great job. And I can say very, very proudly, the gentleman had just shy of 20 years experience in environmental health. And I asked him that question as the final question before they proceeded to the outside of the building. And he said, yes. I said, well, that's the litmus test. And he said, absolutely. So it's really, really important. I don't think people understand the importance of having somebody escort or chaperone the council round who can clearly answer their questions, understand the question that's being asked, and answer the question that's being asked, not some other question, which is very common. And because many landlords are very nervous in the situation, they tend to talk too much and talk problems into existence that weren't there when they arrived. But they loved what they saw. They loved the way it had been put together. They loved the redundancy in this property. As he said, it's a big property, and that's a 300-litre water tank. Absolutely was the right way to do it. When we showed him the electrical circuitry, the work that had been done there, he said takes a lot to make an investment like this, but it really is valuable and worthwhile in the end. And these are the sorts of things that landlords want to hear themselves, but if they're there, they're going to point it out, and then they're looking for praise of what they've done. What we did was we showed it and allowed them to say what they needed to say and what they needed to comment. So we got the feedback that it was right, and we were able to move forward and tell the landlord what a fantastic job he'd done of making the property completely compliant. And there were things that I know other landlords we've seen in other councils have problems with in exactly the same situation for reasons unknown to us. It's, I don't know, different officers, different situations. And they were in absolute agreement that they're not here to have a fight. They are here to make sure it's right. And they really were probably the friendliest people I've seen in since 2018. It was in 2017, 2016, people were like these people were today. But it must be that they've seen so much that they've needed to enforce against some people. They become a bit long in the tooth, a little bit intolerant of people who don't do things properly. So it was wonderful. It was worth the journey, 2.5 hours down to look at it, to do it. And I'm glad the landlord took the time and the opportunity to value our skills and experience. And I must say, he's absolutely over the moon and now knows he's going to get a license for 5 years. Everything that he had last time, he's going to get again. There's going to be no prohibitions or anything taken out, which is always a fear for a landlord who's had a license before and new policies have come in the local area and things change and they don't know how to argue them. And that's why we were here today. So something we do for landlords. It's unique. It's very good. And interestingly, we've got an overseas landlord who's asked us to do exactly the same for him tomorrow on a property we helped him license about 2.5 years ago. So yeah, it's exciting. It's nice to get out, and as one of my old friends would say, it's good to get an airing, Des. And I'm certainly getting the beautiful summer air we've had the last few days. So having some fun, Dave.
That sounds great. Well, I must admit, the thing that went through my mind then, if I'm a landlord, somebody wants to survey it, well, I know more about the property than anybody. I've commissioned all the work, etc. But so I would have guessed most landlords wouldn't even consider contacting you for something like that.
A lot of them don't even realize it's something we do, but of course it is something we do. We have a team across the country of highly experienced environmental health officers, HHSRS inspectors, and fire risk assessors. So we're doing this in all areas of the country for various different reasons. Some it's pre-licensing, so they know they're compliant. Others it's once they've applied for the license and they know the inspection is coming, but they don't know when. But they do know that at some stage somebody's going to inspect, because that's a requirement of HMO licenses. They must be inspected within the 5-year period. And some councils do it before the license is issued, some do it after it's been issued, but they're all very, very different in one way or another. And we offer a service that gives them the peace of mind, allows them to do what they need to do, and we give them the idea that they can get their property compliant without having to always be present and attending every time. In fact, in some cases, I think I would recommend that it's probably better that the landlord stays away when the council comes, because of the reason. The reason being is that they will say things that could open up problems they didn't have.
They didn't need to say. I can totally understand that now you say it. Yes.
Yeah.
Because
So
one of the things people have been talking about as well is how can you help where the council, you've got a 6-bedroom HMO, but a council will come around and do a survey and prohibit use for one or even a couple of the bedrooms.
okay, great. All right. So that's a very, very good question. And we had a situation, and this landlord's come to us for a number of reasons. He's got a very large estate of properties in central London, and he came to us on Friday morning. He booked a call with us, a consultation, and that consultation was a direct consultation with me to review the licenses, the draft licenses he had that he's applied for. He applied for a license a number of years ago. That license came up for renewal. And when that license came up for renewal, a number of the rooms said current occupancy 1 for the license, the next occupancy will be 0. So we looked at the process, we looked at what they were saying, and I went through his license with him. I spent an hour on the Friday morning with him, just an hour before the council was going to come. Now, he's highly known to the council, highly experienced, a massive portfolio. And so it's not that he doesn't know his stuff, but he wanted to know how would we approach and how would we deal with the situation with the council who were coming to do an inspection that morning. So I went through the process with him. I talked through the license. I looked at the room sizes. I looked at the photos of the rooms, the floor plans, how it was laid out. And there were 4 rooms which quite frankly, were borderline to the amenity standards the council have. Now, there are a number of things to think about here, and what the landlord needs to understand is that 6.51 square meters, which is the absolute minimum for single occupation, is considered just a bedroom with nothing else. If you're going to add in an ensuite and you're going to add in cooking facilities, just like the inspection this morning, then the council's likely to have drawn up in its own local plan and guidance some aspirational standards which they'd like landlords to meet. And if you can, it makes good sense to try and meet those standards. So if they say with cooking facilities, with bathroom facilities, and in a bedroom, that room needs to be 12 square meters as an absolute minimum, or 13 or 14. If you can do it, absolutely brilliant, do it. But sometimes you're going to have rooms that have come. So let's say the council, in this particular council, the minimum they wanted for this type of room on their standards was 12 square meters.
Right.
Now, the room size in one of the rooms was 11.4 square meters, and very close. Now, taking all the rooms into account, the 4 rooms that they were going to prohibit, they were all less than a square meter of issue around them. So we took him through a process. We talked about the council's policy. We talked about the council's internal politics. We talked about government aspirations and guidance, what prohibiting the room and the effect that would have in other parts of the council, the stress it would have on the occupants, some who had already lived there quite happily for 7 years. And then we dealt with the size of each of the rooms, which varied between 0.6 and 0.9 of a square meter. We dealt with how those could be demonstrated as being reasonably suitable for occupation as they were designed and as they were. And each one had slightly differently. So I took him through actually the words. I told him the words he should use, how he should approach it. Also knowing the officer that was coming to inspect, how they were, what their belief systems were, what their management's belief systems are, and how they should address that, and how to demonstrate it graphically without confusing them, because sometimes we try to draw things out for people and it becomes very confusing. So we use something physical to show them the size that was in question, and they went about that process and followed it through with the council, and the council at the end said, you know, we appreciate what you're saying. We appreciate as a landlord, you've always done what we've asked you to do. We appreciate that you change things where you need to. So on this property, we're going to allow those 4 rooms. Now let's think about what value that was. Now let's consider the price. I'm not going to say the price of our consultations because that's pointless, but let's say that price was under £1,000. Okay. Yeah. Now that's an hour of time that's under £1,000. The value to the landlord for those rooms was he was now going to lose £1,250 per calendar month in rent. £1,250 per calendar month per room in rent. And let's take that out and say, so that's 4 rooms, that's £5,000 a month over 12 months.
60,000.
That's £60,000 of value we created in 1 hour phone call. Now let's extrapolate that out to a 5-year license. 5 years times 60,000, that's a £300,000 value call. £300,000. Now let's take that out again, and let's say he's investing in a business that he needs to maintain that, and those room sizes were to continue over the course of a 25-year mortgage. That now becomes a 1.5 million value call. Now I'm stretching that out quite a way, but in real terms, £300,000 investing an hour on something a highly experienced landlord, a highly experienced investor, and he could not believe it. He could not believe it. He didn't stop calling us all Friday afternoon. I was back to back Friday afternoon calls. He eventually, unusually, I decided to call him back because I had something that got cancelled on Friday evening. So I was able to, I had an extra hour to do some things. I did a call back to him, and he was the most happiest guy alive. So he had another call with us, and this is about another property. Now, that property has got 21 self-contained rooms within it. And in that 21 of those rooms, 11 of them will not meet the current standard. 11.
Wow.
So you can imagine if those rooms are, we'll call them £1,000 because they're a little bit smaller. That's £11,000 a month he's going to lose, £132,000 a year by them being prohibited.
But even just going back to your first example, black and white, it didn't actually meet the council's criteria. So if that meeting had gone slightly wrong, different rapport with you guys not being there, the council were totally at liberty to say, no, you're still not allowed to use those rooms at all.
Yeah. And the process then would have been that he would probably have had to spend in legal costs, tribunals, appeals, as much as he was going to save. He would have achieved it because that's one of the areas we're reasonably successful at achieving these, if not probably better than most people in achieving that. So the value wouldn't have been 300,000 because he'd have had to go to appeal, and he might have spent 50 or 60,000 to get there with all the different things. Not on our fees. That's proving things, expert reports, testimonials, all those things that you have to put together to prove your case. So he wouldn't have made 300,000. He would have more likely made 240,000 in a year's time. Yeah. So
Right.
again, he didn't have that. Although the rooms would have, well, during an appeal, any restrictions or prohibitions are they're stayed or they're suspended is a better word that everybody knows. So it has value, really does. But in the second example, he's not going to lose all 11 rooms because of the first conversation. They delayed that second inspection in the afternoon, and we've had another conversation about how that's going to be reconfigured and how he's going to change the 11 rooms. Some of them are not going to stay self-contained. They're going to have to change, and they're going to have to become shared bathroom facilities or shared kitchen facilities in a couple of the rooms. But he's going to manage to save 8 of the 11 rooms through the consultation, the design, and the help that's gone on. Now, that's just from what we believe and what we see at the moment. Now, he's got his own design team on board. He's got his own maintenance team on board because he's highly established and has a large portfolio. But one of the things he said is, let's draw up the plans. Then why don't you come to site and consult and tell us exactly how it needs to be and make it right? That's the value for him. So we've already helped him achieve the retention of a bunch of rooms. Now we've gone, we can't save all 11 because, quite frankly, some of them are too small. I can only say that they're too small. And I had to say to him, I could take it to tribunal for you, but they're not going to find them perfect. We've had a few where we've been very successful for a client, but there was one, it just was never going to win with the tribunal or with the council. So we have to face reality. Is it reasonably suitable? Can it be made reasonably suitable through the application of license conditions? And if it can't, then we've got to address how it can be redesigned. And that's what we decided to do with this particular landlord, is let's go through that. So we've had the consultation, we've given him the ideas. He's going to go away and look at those, and then we're going to come to site and work with his team so they can actually implement it. And we'll look at all the other health and safety and fire risk elements so that they don't go forward and do something and then get another, oh, you can't do that, I'm sorry, you're going to have to change it, having done the work already. So we're going to become part of his development team in the design and construction of the HMO as is going to be revised. So in effect, 8 rooms are going to be retained, and they're only going to lose 3. So he's only going to lose somewhere between 3,000, 3,600 a month. But because he's got the other 4 back, you know, he knows that was coming. He sort of anticipated it. So he'll get it fixed, and we will negotiate with the council that he's got 18 months to do that. and we'll work with him and the tenants to displace them into other places rather than just evicting them out and having to find somewhere else to live. He'll help them with that because of the portfolio he's got and keep his compliance in line. So very, very interesting. Lots of stuff we do like that. Lots of people don't know about it. I wish more people did and more people trusted us, because very few people realize the importance that the only defense you have today is compliance.
Yeah, which I can totally understand for a very large landlord like that, where really understands the problems, and it's obvious to get you guys involved as soon as possible. But I'm guessing there's also a lot of other people out there without that sort of experience who just make genuine mistakes, not just on HMOs, but on normal buy-to-lets in selective licensing areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Happens all the time. And they make genuine mistakes. And because we're brought up in a very nice way to deal with things, face our responsibilities, put a hand up when we've made a mistake, unfortunately, for many people who make a genuine mistake, putting their hand up and talking is just adding and compounding to the problem that they already have. So if somebody has a problem and the council is enforcing, then it comes generally because you made a genuine mistake. So there's many people who will call themselves accidental landlords. It's not a phrase I particularly agree with or understand. We all know if we're going to get married, so that was a decision. We all know that if we're going to inherit something, that somebody's going to die, so that's it's a decision to do nothing and then get this property. So it's not accidental. It's actually, you know, it's going to happen, and it's predetermined that you're going to become a landlord, or you do nothing and become that landlord. So the way I look at it is that they don't understand and they lack the information available to them. It's sometimes complex to read and understand, and they do things which they genuinely think are okay. So one of those is you've got a standard house, you were living in it, you move away out of the area, you decide to let the house out. Now you think, well, I've looked up the rules, and what I'm going to do is I'll let a room out so that I can move back to the house when I come back from my job, and I can have lodgers because I own the house.
Yep.
But somewhere along the line, it's now costing you more than you can afford. And out of desperation, you think, what I'll do is for a couple of months, I'll let some other people stay in the property. And you do that, and inadvertently, you have not realized that what you've done is you've got a couple in the property, you've let another couple in, or maybe a couple and a kid or whatever, to use another room or rooms in the property. And then you realize your contract away is going to finish and you want to terminate them. You want to evict them. You need to terminate that contract. But you didn't realize that you created a house in multiple occupation because there were 2 households and 5 occupants. So you need to be licensed. Now
Yeah.
your property was your family home. You've done nothing except rent it out. You don't realize you're doing anything wrong. You might not have even told your mortgage company because you only moved away for a year or 2. And then all of a sudden, you've got all of this crumbling down on top of you. I've created a HMO. The council's coming to inspect because the tenants went to the council to help them find somewhere to live. They asked about the property. They said, it sounds like you're living in a HMO. We need to come around and inspect. And when they go around and inspect, they find that, yes, it is a HMO, unlicensed. They find out it doesn't meet any of the regulations for HMO. So it doesn't meet the fire safety regulations. It hasn't been designed as a HMO. It hasn't been maintained as a HMO. All the shared facilities aren't set up correctly. And it's all a bit of a casual thing that you've done, trying to just get yourself out of a financial situation. And let's say your financial situation was you needed £500 or £600 a month. Now you've just created a £30,000 to £45,000 enforcement problem, because they're going to enforce, and you can't evict the tenants, nor can you evict them until you've got a license application in, nor can you let them keep living there because it's not compliant with the HMO management regulations. So when you add the work that's got to be done to make it compliant, you add up the fact that you need to apply for a license, you add up the fact that you've got all the works to do to make it compliant with the management regulations, plus the fine for not having the license, plus the fine for each of the management regulations you haven't complied with. And you sit there and people are putting their hands in their head and as the song says, going, oh no, oh no. But they are literally
Mm.
don't realize they've done this. And in despair, they're scared to appoint someone to help them because they don't actually know. One, sometimes they don't have the money to get out of the problem. Sometimes they don't have the ideas or the ways to get out of it. And their ideas that they're going to use are generally worse than the idea they already had. They believe quite often they can talk their way out with the council and say, yeah, it's just a genuine mistake. The council doesn't care about your genuine mistake. These are strict liability offences. So it's key that one, you stay silent with the council. Some people think that's crazy, crazy advice, but trust us because we've seen it too many times. The less you say is better because the more you say, the more you justify, the more you self-incriminate and compound the situation and give them all the ammunition. So what we do is we say, let us at least take control and say you're represented. Let us talk to the council. Let us have an off the record conversation and work out what they're really trying to do. Let us go about it in a way that may or may not, but I'm going to say most times will alleviate the situation and give you the space to breathe. But don't just go ahead and talk to them and explain things to them and say, oh no, don't come because that's just going to make them come quicker. They're going to throw fuel on you're going to throw fuel on the fire. It's a very the most important thing, if you're making genuine mistakes, invest the time and the effort and the money to get the professional advice and then follow that advice. And the reason I say that is, interestingly, this morning, a gentleman who came to us 4 years ago had a prohibition order on a number of flats he owns, and he didn't take our advice, he didn't follow our advice, and of course he's gone through the process of doing what he thought he should do, and because the council were doing what they do, he didn't get the result that he wanted. He got a partial result, but what's happened is that he's thinking that he's getting on and he's thinking everything's going right. But with the restrictive license he had that he didn't realize was restricted, they've now 4 years on put him in a situation where he can no longer hold a license because he accepted his own advice, he listened to his own advice, acted on his own advice, made declarations on his own advice, and without taking into consideration the full holistic picture. And so as a result, he's probably not going to be able to manage properties ever again, and he may well get a banning order because of the accumulation of offences he didn't realise he was committing on top of another offence, on top of another offence, on top of another offence, because he listened and said, no, I don't want to do what you tell me to do. I'm going to do it my way because that will be better and it will save me money, and I can convince my tenants to do it my way. But the council weren't interested in his abdications, his changing, although he got things fixed and they accepted things were fixed. The offence had already happened and they continued to do that, and they didn't, unfortunately, be lenient on him, and they're not going to be lenient on him. As it turns out, he's got more than 2 handfuls of other properties, which it turns out are not compliant either in one way or another. So yeah, they're going to throw the book at him. But if he'd listened 4 years ago, over the last 4 years, we would have held his hand, guided him, shown him what to do, and the cost of what it would cost for us to do would have been a fraction of what it's going to cost him long term now. It's unfortunate. So that's why we help people who make genuine mistakes. They were both genuine mistakes, misunderstandings, and have compounded massively, those 2 examples there. But this is really, really common, and especially again amongst people who deal with the council and they're investors, they're landlords, and they know more than the council officers. That sometimes causes even bigger problems. And I would say the many councils we've worked with, many councils, people say we fight with, we don't fight. We negotiate and work through things, or we go against them in legal battles in order to get the best result for the landlord. As far as I'm concerned, some of these things, people push them too far, and when they call us, it's a little bit too late to solve the problem because they've done damage that can't be undone. Get the advice up front. Yeah. If you think you've got a problem and it's beginning to give you an itch, ask then. Don't wait till it becomes a rash, and don't wait until it becomes takes over your whole body type thing. You really have to ask at the beginning. So much can be done. Sometimes the answer is very simple, but if you do too many things because you didn't do the simple thing at the beginning, it's sometimes very, very hard to undo the damage that's been done.
And with the licensing as well, it's not just down to the individual property. So if you've got a portfolio landlord with a number of HMOs, am I right in thinking if he gets the license taken away from one, that actually impacts every property he can manage?
It could do, yes. It really depends on how they wish to approach it. So when you commit housing offences, whether that's in planning, whether that's in licensing, whether that's in housing health and safety rating system or fire regulations, etc. That's a declaration under HMO licensing or a selective licensing about a fit and proper to be a landlord. And if you lie in that declaration, that's a false declaration. So how can I describe this in something that you might better understand? If you drive a motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol and you're above the legal limit to drive a motor vehicle, there is an offence that's committed, and there are automatic sanctions that are put on drivers who do that. But equally, if you refuse to provide a sample of breath at the roadside, and you refuse also to give breath at the police station, or a blood sample, if it goes that far, in refusing to give any one of those, you commit an offence. The penalty is the same as if you had overdrunk. So if you're completely sober and you do refuse, well, you may as well have been drunk. The offence is the same. Should I say the offence isn't the same, the penalty is the same. So if you make a false declaration to a council about your fit and proper status, then you will find that you have committed an offence the same as not having the license or not having complied with an improvement notice or a prohibition order. And some councils, and we've done this successfully with some councils, they will look at a landlord and they will assess their suitability under Section 66, which is the fit and proper test. And sometimes, even though a landlord may be guilty of an offence, if they can demonstrate that they have the management systems and processes, they may still be found fit and proper. Now, we've done that a couple of times for landlords who were being investigated. They committed some offences. On the whole, they thought they were a good landlord, but they were just naive to the issues they had around them. And what we did was we took them through a process of restructuring the management of their business, how they could put together their management systems, what they should do in each part of the process, so the workflow was there, and then they could retrain them, put those systems in place for them, so that then they could pass and demonstrate to the council they had changed enough that they couldn't commit the offences again unless somebody within their employer, one of their employees, didn't follow the process, but they had ways and means of dealing with that if the employee didn't do it correctly. So another thing that we do is, if your business is in an absolute complete mess and you don't know why it's not working or things are going wrong, then we will come and look at that, and we will show you how to fix that and do that work. It's especially if you're thinking about buying a portfolio of HMOs, or buying a letting agents, or buying a company that's got a lot of properties in it already. All of that is part of the due diligence, and quite often, and I know recently a company needed to do some due diligence on something it was buying, and I know that when they were looking for the firm to do the due diligence for them, they hadn't taken into consideration so many things that were really, really important before making the purchase. And yeah, you've got to know all that you're looking at, and many people don't. And I think it's very, very important to seek advice when you're doing anything in property that's different to something you've always been doing. And even if you're doing what you've always been doing, in the last 10 years, we've had 540 pieces of new legislation and regulations added to the responsibility of landlords. That's more than one a week for the last 10 years. So
Five
think about that.
new
What
piece.
did you learn last week? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So, so the question is, say, I run a couple of HMOs, haven't had an inspection at all. Um, Pretty sure that I'm compliant in everything, but suddenly I get contacted by the council. They want to do the first inspection ever on one of my properties.
yeah.
I think I'm compliant. What would your advice be to me in that situation?
Right. So the first thing is you need to move that appointment out for as far away as possible as you can. So if they want to come tomorrow, you can't give notice, then the tenants need 24 hours notice. You can't force the tenants to give you no access. You only the council can do that. So the key is, how are they asking you? Is it casual, or are they issuing something called a section 239 notice? It's a section 239 notice. This is a notice of right to access, and their notice of entry. So they're going to issue that notice, and they generally send it to the tenants and all the interested parties in regards to the operation of the property. So the landlord and any sub-landlord that may be involved as well. And they will then access the property and they will inspect it under Part 1 of the Housing Act, which is Housing Act 2004, which is HHSRS, and they will assess the property to see that it's compliant. Now, what you need to do is, if I take my car for an MOT and it fails, I have the opportunity to take the car away, get it repaired or have it repaired in the same place, and retest it within a certain amount of time for no penalty.
Yeah.
It's very different with housing. When they come, it's a strict liability offence if you're not compliant. So if I was in that situation that I took my car for an MOT and I couldn't drive it away unless it was right, and I might not want to garage who I'm taking it to do the work because they're extortionately expensive, I'm likely to take it to somebody else who's highly qualified, who's going to tell me it's going to pass before I take it for the final test, the mock test. So the most important thing is to have a mock test. So call the tenants up. So we need to inspect the whole property. We're going to be going through a period over the next few weeks of health and safety and improvements for your safety and for your security. And so what we'd like to do is start to come up. We're going to come and look at the property 24 hours and get around there as quickly as possible and check everything. If it's a selective license property, check all the things for HHSRS. There are 29 hazards. If you don't know those, get somebody who does, a qualified HHSRS certified inspector to go and inspect. And go and check that it's safe for fire regulations, it's clean and tidy. And if your local housing authority publishes its selective licensing conditions, go and look at what all those conditions are and make sure that you're compliant with all of those. Now, selective licensing, there are some things about antisocial behavior and other bits and pieces, which I'm not going to go into now, but you need to make sure that your tenants are complying, they're doing what they're supposed to do. And if it's a HMO, you need to make sure that you get over there straight away and make sure everything's okay. So today you could go around and look at your HMO, and there could be nothing. There might be nothing in the hallways, which is the protected fire escape route.
Yep.
But you could go back tomorrow, and their friends come over. They brought a bike with them, and they've stuffed it in the hallway. Well, if you don't go and check and make sure your tenants are not putting things in the hallway and blocking the fire escape route, the council turns up, and that can happen. Now, the council, if they're giving you notice, there is one because they've scheduled it in, or two because there's been a complaint at the property. So if you've had a recent complaint from the tenant and you haven't responded to it, and now the council wants to inspect, it's under their duty when something is reported for them to go and do an inspection. So you need to think about, how can I prevent the council coming around? And you need to make sure that your tenants know that the reporting process for all matters is to you first as the landlord or the agent. And what happens if you don't get response in 24 or 48 hours? And I would suggest in both of those are milestones to be considered. What is the escalation process so that the local authority isn't number 2 on their list? It's number 7, 8, or 9. Yeah. And it really, if you're managing properties and you're not responding promptly and definitely within 24 hours, you can expect that you're going to end up getting enforcement action from the tenant via the local housing authority. And if you're not repairing things, you're going to get disrepair claim. And once that starts happening, you don't want any of that. So if you get the council giving you a call, the first thing to do is to get around the house and do an inspection and check the gardens are tidy, check the communal areas are tidy, check it's in good decor, check there's no damp, check there's no mold growing anywhere, make sure there's not cobwebs all over the place. If it's a buy-to-let, it's their home. You've got to make sure they're ventilating. You've got to make sure they are keeping the place clean. If it's a HMO, make sure the common parts, the bathrooms aren't leaking. There's no damp in them. There's no mold in them. The property we inspected this morning, I could not believe how clean all the bathrooms were. And I asked the owner, I said, how do you keep the individual bedrooms so clean and tidy? He said, because the people who take the rooms are prepared to pay a premium for a cleaner to come every 2 weeks and clean their own individual rooms. And they clean the bathrooms. He said, so there's no mold, no mildew, no lime scale, there's no damp. Because they're in the room, and when they see something's wrong, they report it. If they see something needs painting, they report it. So the tenants are happy, the occupants love paying the extra, and they don't have to think about cleaning. It's like living in a hotel for them. Really is. And they've got all the benefits of individual mini apartments with communal areas, with big kitchens to go and cook and do whatever if they want to get a few friends around a big table, etc. So it is absolutely vital that if the council's coming, even on a property like the one today, which was perfect, pre-inspections were done yesterday. I did a pre-inspection again this morning. Everything was made exactly as it needed to be. Was everything perfect? Of course not. There'll have been something that shouldn't have been there. Yeah. I think in one of the rooms, there was a petrol can. Now it didn't have any petrol in it. It didn't smell of any petrol. It looked brand new. So we called the occupant and said, would it be possible to please for us to remove that and put it somewhere safe? Because it looks like you've got petrol in the room. And by the way, you can't have petrol in the room. They said, oh, no. I bought that. It's for the car, but the car's got to the garage. And I took all my things out. That's why there were all those things in the room. Funny, that was the only thing that looked dangerous. There was probably one of the bags was a little tool bag or something. Who knows? But, stuff like this. Imagine a petrol can in HMO. What would you think if you were an environmental health officer coming round?
I was going to raise alarm bells when no alarm bells need to be raised.
Absolutely. And what are all the things, if they've got a load of things in their room that you think, hold on a second, there's a fire hazard here. You're doing regular inspections every 2 weeks. Say, listen, guys, I don't really think that air fryer next to your bed is a good idea. Now it might not be what's actually, it might be they borrowed it. Maybe they use it in the kitchen and they take it to their room because they don't want everybody else using it. But it's your job as a landlord or an agent who's managing a property to understand where the fire risk is. Now I don't know if an air fryer, what risk it is because I haven't got one. I don't even know how they work, but it's just an example. Yeah, but definitely if you've got a deep fat fryer, well, we all know how chip pan fires start. Yeah. So great.
Because a lot of the stuff we've been talking about is when it comes to the inspection by the local council. Do you ever have issues where people just about to buy a property or just bought a property but apply for a license and the council are looking to refuse the license even before an inspection?
Right, absolutely. So that is it always not always before them, but people do get refused the license. Now, if you've ever bought car insurance, one of the questions they ask you is, have you ever been refused, declined, or had your insurance withdrawn?
Yeah.
And if you have, for whatever reason, it could be something really silly, like you're too young, or you know, you're married the wrong person, or you've got the wrong profession. You're a racing driver, and they say, well, you become a racing driver and we don't insure you anymore. Well, they're refusing to insure you. You'd have to declare that. Now,
Material fact.
the same when your license is refused, you will always have to declare you've had it refused. Now, when that happens, we're seeing cases where we talked about prohibition of one room. Some councils prohibit one room. Some councils will issue a license, or a notice, should I say, a notice that's of intention to refuse to grant a license on a whole property because one room isn't compliant. One particular London borough that does it, they will say it's completely none. And at that point, you need to seek professional advice, because the notice of intention, it's an intention, it's not a decision. And you need to represent against that properly and professionally. I see so many people presenting representations that tell a nice story, argue nicely, and your mum, your dad, your mates, cousins, brothers, best friends, girlfriends, daughters, uncles, grandfather will probably think it's really good argument. And your cousin will, and your mate down the pub will, and the guy you meet at football on Saturday, and the guy who goes to rugby with you every month, he'll think it's a great argument too. But if it's got no legal standing, or it doesn't understand, it doesn't meet the requirements to get a license partially, and maybe not refuse the whole house, then you probably should get somebody who knows what they're doing and has done it a number of times before to do that for you. Because again, remember the guy at the beginning where he had 4 rooms and that was worth 300,000 to him over the course of the license? Well, what's it going to cost you to not have the license? And what's it going to cost you if you're constantly saying, yeah, I've been refused a license? You say, but it wasn't really anything. Yeah, but they refused it because you didn't know how to stop them refusing it, and to get you a license that had maybe a restriction or a prohibition that may only be a temporary prohibition. I'm thinking of one particular property, it needed more light, and they weren't going to have the whole property licensed because one room needed more light. Now that required a light well, and what we did was we got the property licensed for the 5 other rooms. And then we consulted, we got the light surveys done, we did all of the arrangement for the contractors for the client, because it was completely out of their of their scope, even though they have a team of contractors in their thousands of HMOs across London. But we helped them get that sorted. We made sure the light measure levels were right, and then we got that room, the only room that should have been prohibited, we eventually got that room added to the license as a variation of license. It wasn't an overnight thing, but there was 6 months of 5 rooms, which probably bring in £1,000 a month each. Yeah, so 5 6s is 30,000, because we didn't allow the notice of intention to refuse a license to proceed, because there was ways to do it against the council that, quite frankly, I've seen them prohibit so many people and refuse licenses for so many people, and had people referred to us and gone, if you come to us in the first place, those 20 properties or so that you've been refused licenses on in your portfolio, none of them would have been refused under our guidance and our representation. The money it's cost them, they're beginning to realize, is massive, and our fees are insignificant to the value that it brings. So it's very, very important. If somebody's refusing to give you what you want or apply for, then seek professional advice, pay the money it takes to get it solved, and then the value ongoing. As I would say, you may question my fees, but what are you comparing it to? My time, my hourly rate, whatever you want to call it? No, you've got to compare it to the value we are delivering. And we're actually, when you look at value, we're cheap. And if I looked at the percentage, that if we took a percentage of the money that we save people, or the money we make people, our fees would be 10 to 15 times, if not in some cases 20 times bigger than we charge. So it really is what value do we bring? That's why the clients we have stick with us, and those that find it too expensive is because they don't understand the value. And I'm sorry, if you're an investor and you don't understand value and you allow yourself to be enforced against and 10 to 15 years of profits to be removed, well, quite frankly, you don't meet the definition of an investor, because you're not getting a return on your money. You're not an investor. And I don't want to use the word that I think I should, but I won't.
I can see exactly where you're coming from, though, on that.
Yeah.
So another question, the planning permission in respect of HMOs, I wanted to delve into why you feel that's really important, but also specifically regarding the Article 4 directive.
Right. Okay. So what people misunderstand is that to change a property's use requires planning permission. That's the end of it. Absolute end of it. Any change of use requires planning permission. And why do people say you don't need planning permission for HMOs? Is because of something called the General Permitted Development Order. Okay, the General Permitted Development Order, which comes under various different classes and today, but let's keep it simple. That's been around since 2015. 2010, sorry. And it's been around, and it's been around because the Permitted Development Order, General Permitted Development Order, says that you can do something under that order in place of planning permission. So if it's a general permitted development, you can do what you would normally need planning permission for. You can now do it without the need for making the formal application. So let's take it into something that may be a little bit more familiar to people, was cafes, street cafes in COVID. Remember, we had the campaign Eat Out to Help Out. And because we needed to space people out in restaurants more, many restaurants, when the good weather came, they opened out onto terraces on the pavements and into car parks and areas like that. Well, they did that during COVID so that people were more spaced out, and because we had air. Well, over time, the Parliament or the government has now made that a general. Normally, you would have needed planning permission. They made a temporary order that could happen. Now that's a general permitted development right, or a permitted development right to be able to do that. Now, does permitted development mean that you don't need to make an application or you don't need to contact your council? No. Though, like houses and like the pavement order, you normally need a pavement license as well. So for HMOs, you need planning permission, except under the permitted development, where it's a HMO of 3, because a HMO starts at 3, up to 6 people. And that is allowed as long as the Article 4 direction. And Article 4 direction is about conservation. So an Article 4 direction says, although there is a permitted development right, we're going to remove that permitted development right so that you do need planning permission for all HMOs. So in an Article 4 area, they restrict the number of HMOs that can be in place. And if you want more than 6, you've always needed planning permission, because that's for 7, 8, 9, 10, or like the HMO I was at this morning, for 11. Even though it's only got 6 rooms, the property could have been developed for 6 rooms or 6 households and 6 occupants. But because the rooms are big and because the landlord wanted flexibility, it's permitted for up to 11. So at any time, in 5 of the 6 rooms, he can have a couple at any time he wants. He can actually have 5 couples and 1 single if he wanted to. And yes, it makes a lot more money. Will it be as comfortable? Who knows? That really remains to be seen. But the way it goes is people apply, the room is a room rate for a single or for a couple. And the landlord who's delivering quality, the numbers are right and the business plan is right, you'll apply for planning permission. But every HMO, if you're going to create a HMO, you need to consider the planning implications, whether it will need a formal planning application because there's Article 4, and if it doesn't need a formal planning application, are you following the rules under the general permitted development order? And if you need building regulations, have you done that? Because we have a number of people currently who have HMOs. They are C4, which is the use class for a HMO from 3 to 6 occupants, but the council planning department is trying to enforce because they believe it's something else. And the bit that I'm going to talk about here is when you make what are self-contained units and you make a dwelling, you make, say, maybe 6 dwellings instead of 6 rooms because there are no shared facilities. And it's very trendy at the moment for people to go and make all ensuite and cooking facility rooms in HMOs. And they change the property into what are essentially, from a planning perspective, 6 flats which are completely self-contained. So 5 more dwellings have been created that don't come under the HMO under section 254 or section 257 of the Housing Act 2004. And that would require planning permission. And again, it's very important, if you're going to do development, you're going to change something, that all of these parts are taken into account, because people say, I'm doing it under permitted development, not realizing what they're doing is something that does need planning permission. And the number of cases we've got where they have actually done it correctly, but the council can't see it as it is, and they want to enforce, we have to push back on the basics of this has been done correctly. And luckily for the clients that we do that, most of them are large portfolios. So we're talking properties or HMOs, more than 1,000 HMOs. They've done it properly, but it doesn't stop the whole enforcement process. And you'd think somebody with 1,000 properties and they know what they're doing and etc., why would they need our firm? Because they don't see what we see as often as we see. They don't have the experience we have. They only have their own experience. They want our experience, our knowledge, our brains to go and fight for them, because we'll do it properly and passionately. But at the same time, we won't be getting angry because our business isn't going the way we want it to and we're becoming desperate. They can express their problems with it not being right to us and how it's frustrating their business. But our job is to take that, translate that into a solid representation and to get them the security that they're looking for, that they've done everything correctly. So planning permission is important, even though you might think you're doing it under permitted development. Are you seeking the advice that you've got the right things in place? And if not, then talk to us and we will arrange for somebody to do your planning permission for you, who understands things the way that we do. We don't do planning permission. We do planning contravention notices. We do planning contravention issues, and we will, if you're being enforced and legally done for a breach of a planning enforcement notice, well, we will work on that. But applying for planning permission, we have 3 partners we work with who we trust and work very well with to do that. And you're better off coming to us and getting the things sorted first of all, where we take the holistic view of licensing, building regulations, and planning all in one. And then if you need to work with that person directly or through us, it doesn't matter to us which way you do it. We'll make sure that you're going on the right path. Very, very important.
Oh, basically, I think really it seems to come down to, don't be reactive with the councils and licensing, wait for them to come to you. Be proactive and come and talk to yourselves right from day one before you start creating yourselves expensive and messy problems.
Absolutely. And a lot of people come to us who have worked with developers. They followed the developer's plan. They followed the model. They cookie cutted everything. And then they realize they've got a problem because that local authority is slightly different, or there's something they didn't know. So we had a situation recently where they had planning permission for 5 bedsits. And then they sent everything to us, and somewhere along the line something had been changed, so they still had their 5 bed sits, but like I just said there, they'd actually created a second flat by moving a door they hadn't realized would create that flat. And literally, by going through the process with them, we managed to get them to understand what they needed to do. And we moved the door literally 20 meters up the corridor, and it made it back to what's a section 254 HMO. And then they were able to apply for a license for the property because it hadn't required a license before. They brought in additional licensing, and we said, well, by moving that door and the documentation that we've got for by moving that door, you created an HMO. They also needed they also had Article 4, so they needed the planning permission. But we already had that, and it'd been in existence for more than 20 years. So by moving the door and paying licensing, we solved a problem that would have meant them going to council tax by bedsit. Yeah, an absolute fortune. It would have gone from something like £1,800 for the whole house per year to £1,300 per bedsit. Think about that.
Yeah, the impact.
All because we moved a door and then said, now you've created the HMO and the licensing that it wasn't before. So very, very interesting. But it's these things, and people say, but yeah, he told me that and I'll be able to do that myself. Great, good luck. But please come back and tell us when your representations don't work and those things. We do love people who go and do things themselves. We think it's very, very good. But, I do tend to ask people a little bit about things I don't know about, I haven't done before. I tend to ask somebody who's done them before, what I should be looking out for. So if that's all you come to us for and you want to look out for what should we be looking out for, we're happy to tell you. We're happy to guide you. Not everybody who comes to us to talk to us needs to do. Some people just need a short diagnosis call, 10 minutes. Some people need a licensing exploration call, 20 minutes, gone through something. You need to do this, consider this, move on. Some people need something more. Maybe they need a half an hour consultation to talk about their process or situation. Other people need an hour's consultation, and some need a couple of hours consultation to go through everything, and they need nothing more. And then some people, they need a consultation and they need support and they need a done for you service, because what they needs to be done and sorted is not something they do on a daily basis. So covers a lot of what we do. This isn't about what we do. It's about helping people understand that there's a lot out there to consider, and there's so much new stuff coming all the time. It's going to become more difficult, which is good in some respects, because the people who don't want to continue will leave the market, and there'll be less competition. But you have to become better at your game. And if you look at cars, there was really no need for cars from the 50s and 60s to get any better. But look at how cars are today in comparison to the 50s and 60s. I think the cars from the 50s and 60s are still beautiful.
Yeah.
But some of them shake your bones more than the cars do today. Some of them skid more easily than the cars do today. Some of them started more easily, or you could fix them more easily than the cars you do today. So there's, but have a combination of both. If you're going to have things, know the new stuff, also know the old stuff. But if you need help and advice, seek it from those who know, because the money you will save in the long term is enormous.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. And because there's so much new legislation constantly coming through, as you said, averaging one new piece a week, just touch base with you guys before you start causing problems with yourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it's something we can't help you with, first person who's going to say we can't help you with it is me, because we want to do what we do best. And we want other people to do what they do best, to do those things, not to try and play and do things we don't know. We really aren't in that business that we can do everything and know everything and can handle everything. There are some things we don't know, and what those are, I'm not even going to start with. The list would be too long.
Cool. Des, it's been absolutely fascinating chatting to you as always.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
Knowledge is just unbelievable. So no, I just want to say thank you. Yeah, look forward to chatting again in another month or two then.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much, Dave. Been wonderful. Thank you very much.
Brilliant stuff. Really good to see you again. Catch you soon.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.